I went to go see Disclosure Day. The fascinating part for me wasn't whether each scene might literally be true. It was the overarching themes that definitely applied. The concept of screen memories. Owls, deer, familiar animals. A large percentage of people who are experiencers, a lot of times, one of the last things that those people remember seeing, whether they're driving down the road or they're in their yard or they're in their house even, it can even be in their room, is an animal. And that is the memory that you're left with. And then there's a fuzzy bit, and then usually you wind up back in your bed or back driving your car, wherever you were before. One of two things could be happening in those moments: that a replacement memory is pushed upon the experiencer, or that certain beings may have the capability to holographically project their body to look like something else, to keep people from being afraid, frankly. While many people do experience what they feel is trauma or a real feeling of psychological fear during abduction experiences, many of them who do a hypnotic regression actually often come to a better place with it because they realize, oh, A, it wasn't what I thought it was, and B, there was a purpose for it, and I didn't have anything to be afraid of. Because let's face it, even if a being were as nice as ever, if it looks like a monster to you because you've never seen one before, you're gonna freak the fuck out. Who wouldn't? I would, even though I know other beings exist, you know? If one was standing next to my bed, I'd be like, what the fuck are you doing here? You scared the shit out of me. So, as you might imagine, I went to go see Disclosure Day, Steven Spielberg's new film about just that, Disclosure Day. Disclosure Day is probably not for UFO enthusiasts, but it can be appreciated nonetheless. The fascinating part for me wasn't whether each scene might literally be true. It was the overarching themes that definitely applied and that he clearly did some research about. Themes that experiencers have, that people that have UFO sightings, people that have researched this topic definitely tend to lean towards. Let's start with one of my favorite. Well, first of all, Emily Blunt is a favorite of mine. I love that she can be serious, but also there's just this flavor of humor that I'm glad that they kind of allowed to shine through her throughout this movie because it just added a little extra something. I appreciated that. Plus, she's pretty cute. Doesn't hurt. One of my favorite themes that was explored in this movie was the concept of screen memories. Owls, deer, familiar animals. A large percentage of people who are experiencers, either they recall some sort of experience that they later believe is an abduction and do perhaps a hypnotic regression to try to find out more information about, or they just generally have memories of bits and pieces of something that they're trying to put together. And a lot of times, one of the last things that those people remember seeing, whether they're driving down the road or they're in their yard or they're in their house even, it can even be in their room, is an animal. Oftentimes it is a deer, an owl, a raccoon, a fox, something familiar to that person, usually, perhaps native to the area that they're in, something that wouldn't seem out of the ordinary for that person, if that makes sense in a lot of ways. Sometimes, actually, it can be a pet or a deceased loved one, and that is the memory that you're left with. And then there's a fuzzy bit, and then usually you wind up back in your bed or back driving your car, wherever you were before. Hey there, what's up? My name's Ash. I'm a life coach, and well, you might be wondering why I'm doing a video on Disclosure Day, but it's because I'm a life coach who believes that disclosure is happening. It is going to affect every single one of us, and if nobody else is going to talk about it, I will. So here we are. But day to day, we're talking about regular life stuff, going through big life shifts, how to make good decisions for yourself, how to do better in general. And if you're neurodiverse, this is definitely a place for you. I'm also a neurodiverse coach. I help people who are ADHD and autistic find their purpose, find their flow, and build a life that works better for who they are and how they function. So if you're all about the aliens, or if you're just looking for practical, everyday, good advice to do better, to attract better, to build a better you, then you're in the right place. Like this video, subscribe, and I put out new videos every week. I can't stress enough how common this is with experiencers, and I saw just from the preview for the movie before I even saw it, I realized that he was going to touch upon that because you saw a deer's face and then it starts turning and the camera's panning and all of a sudden it turns into like the face of like a gray alien being. I like the way they did that in the movie. And again, it is actually something that does happen to people. Experiencers have this happen all the time. If you want to read more about this, I highly recommend reading Abduction by John Mack, who's now deceased. He was a psychiatrist who basically devoted his whole life to this. He started examining people who believed that they were experiencers, and through basically decades of research, he came to the conclusion that nearly all of the people that he encountered who believed that they had experiences, he wasn't there, he can't say for sure, but what he always said was, it's evident to me that whatever they experienced was real to them, 100%. But he was inclined to be a believer in this because of all of the consistencies that these people reported to him in confidence in these sessions over years and years and years. So his book, Abduction, is a great one. And then from there, if you really want to get wild, I highly recommend Dolores Cannon. Dolores Cannon is an American hero, in my opinion. She is a little old woman from Arkansas who transitioned on to her next life in 2014, but she left behind her, I don't know, 30, 40 books. I've read pretty much all of them at this point. She basically stumbled upon hypnosis and hypnotic regressions when looking for something to do. Something happened in their lives where she was just like, I need to find something to do for work. Learned regression work, and then actually developed her own method of regression that is still used today. And it's one of the most popular regression techniques for doing like past life level regressions. She worked with clients who believed that they were experiencers too, many of them. And much of her findings were very similar to John Mack's. And Bud Hopkins is another author who's done work on this, though I have to admit I have not read a lot of his work. So if you want to dive into Dolores Cannon world, I highly recommend you try to understand past life regressions and hypnotic regressions if you don't know anything about them. I would go back and watch a video of mine about past lives that I just did, and I talk about a book called Many Lives, Many Masters. He unknowingly stumbled upon past lives with a client of his and has since devoted his whole entire life to it. He's still with us. And that was back in the 80s, and he wrote this book, and it has been like a bestseller for so many years. Past life regressions are possible. You can access memories from lives that are not this one. And I don't expect you to believe that just based on what I'm saying. I just encourage you to go read the book if you're a skeptic. But if you're not and you understand this, then by all means go on to Dolores Cannon world. If you just want to understand multidimensional kind of quantum physics concepts and maybe what life was like here on Earth many moons ago, and up to and including understanding the phenomenon of abduction and our interactions with other beings, she's a great author to start. So if you want to start anywhere with Dolores Cannon, I would probably start with her Convoluted Universe book series. I think it's 5 parts. You can kind of do one and go back to other things and come back to the second one, and it's okay. But if you specifically want to learn more about abductions, I would do The Custodians. The Custodians is a great book that's kind of specifically about abduction experiences. And like I said, many of the things that she covers in that book are super similar to things that John Mack covered with his clients as well. The idea of screen memories or a psychological overlay or something of that sort are things that have come up for both authors. The prevailing school of thought is that one of two things could be happening in those moments. That a replacement memory is kind of pushed upon the experiencer, or that certain beings may have the capability to kind of holographically project their body to look like something else. Maybe even if just for a few minutes to keep people from being afraid, frankly, is usually what it comes down to. And that's usually the reason behind screen memories, is to keep humans from being afraid of these experiences. Because while many people do experience what they feel is trauma or a real feeling of psychological fear during abduction experiences, I have to say that many of them who do a hypnotic regression actually often come to a better place with it, meaning they understood that it was really the equivalent of a checkup and there was a reason for it, And that reason may not be super clear to most humans day to day, and they wouldn't believe it. Oftentimes, it could be as simple as other beings being concerned about the level of chemicals and whatever effects our environment may be having on our bodies, things like that. Some of it is for genetic material, some of it is, again, just observation of some kind, and not meant to be harmful in any way and not meant to be forceful. And in fact, if you really want to go there, what a lot of people end up finding out during these hypnotic regressions is that they agreed before their lifetime on Earth to participate in this. And while they were dragged kicking and screaming in their human form because they don't remember that, in hypnotic regressions, oftentimes these people come again to a much better place with the whole experience because they realize, oh, A, it wasn't what I thought it was, and B, there was a purpose for it, and I didn't have anything to be afraid of. I was just experiencing ontological shock because I didn't know that aliens were here checking up on us. It's as simple as that. Most of the time, there are some people who do have fear-based negative interactions where free will is not a thing and fear is induced, and fear is very much part of the experience. Maybe not necessarily on purpose, but there's just no thought to how this might affect a human person. And the truth is that, like people, 95% of them are mostly good, and 5% of them, they're kind of shitheads. And that might be true of other beings too. And we just, have to think of it like that. So, whether screen memories are just something that's kind of implanted there as a replacement, a placeholder, if you will, or whether it's a being that can kind of holographically project themselves to look a little bit like something else temporarily, the purpose behind it is usually the same in these scenarios. That after research, a lot of people conclude that it seems like it was just to alleviate fear and make them a little more approachable. Because let's face it, even if a being were as nice as ever, if it looks like a monster to you because you've never seen one before, you're gonna freak the fuck out. Who wouldn't? I would, even though I know other beings exist. If one was standing next to my bed, I'd be like, "What the fuck are you doing here? You scared the shit out of me." Another theme. In the beginning of the movie, a cardinal flies into Emily Blunt's apartment and stands on the table and is just standing there chirping, and she's like, "Oh, what a beautiful moment with, one of God's creatures," and it takes off eventually and flies out the window. Well, then all of a sudden she is speaking another language. She knows information that she shouldn't be able to know. She's analyzing information at a rate that most humans cannot. She's experiencing something, right? An advancement, a download, if you will. That is also a common effect of experiencers. Many times people who have an encounter, they're an experiencer of some kind, they've had an abduction event, often inexplicable things are happening with them. Kind of like a savantism can take over. Some people just start picking up things that they didn't know they could pick up. They understand science and mathematical problems that they could have never figured out before. It wasn't their field of study. They just aren't even good at math, whatever. Different languages, learning how to play music, a lot of stuff like that has happened as the after effect of an experiencer or a contact event for someone. And in the movie, Emily Blunt is all of a sudden aware of all these things, and she can basically read people's minds essentially in the movie, which is freaking everybody out around her. They have no idea what's going on with this girl. And also, like, what we would consider psychic or spiritual experiences like that often happening to people afterwards. Or just being kind of like overcome with this desire for oneness and just being kind of disappointed as a human that we act the way we act sometimes. I think there's an overarching theme of that too for many experiencers who kind of have a download or just feel very differently about life consequentially because of it. It's to the point where people develop these artistic abilities, whatever, and they claim that that was actually more profound than the contact event itself. That would happen afterwards was the real effect, was the most profound aspect of it. Third, empathy as a measure of an advanced civilization. So I won't be giving away too much to say that The government people in this movie are very much focused on this technology, what it can do for them, and just having a literal death grip on the technology that they feel like is their key to making the most advanced weapons and basically doing the most effed up stuff that they can imagine. And there's no cognizance of the beings that they've taken this technology from, the impact that it would have on humanity and on them, frankly, for just being careless with it and misusing it. We're talking about energy levels that would make anything that we have, any weaponry we have, look just silly by comparison. But the theme that ends up coming out is that, one of these people that's kind of a breakaway basically gets in an argument with, the military kind of industrial complex, type character. He gets in an argument with him. He's like, you don't understand. Out of all the research we did with them, empathy was their biggest indicator of a successful, thriving civilization. And empathy is what humans need to see to understand, the whole concept. And that is true, honestly. Many, many experiencers have, in what interactions they end up recalling with another being, if it wasn't kind of a cold medical situation where it was kind of like an exam situation, if there was any kind of interaction, often the beings would make some sort of comment or make a point to show humans projections of images of the things that we've done to our planet and show them what its effect will be and try to instill in them, please, do better for yourselves, for all of us, kind of deal. One of the most profound ones that comes up for me is it was a school in Zimbabwe, and James Fox did a documentary on it. It's a phenomenon. Came out in 2020. He talked about one of the most famous daylight landing multiple witness cases there ever was. It was a children's school in Zimbabwe, and it was a bunch of kids out in a play yard, and these craft came hovering overhead and landed just beyond the chain link fence of the big playground. And so all the children were drawn towards it. They all kind of ran to the edge of the fence. And I mean, dozens and dozens of children and a couple of teachers kind of witnessed this. I think the children were way further ahead and the teachers weren't as close. But all of the children reported the same thing. They all were. John Mack actually was still alive at the time, and he went and interviewed all these kids, and they all drew a similar looking craft, and they said that these beings, very short beings, got out of their craft and stood no further than 20 feet away from some of these kids, and the kids kind of felt like they were stuck there, and that they were receiving messages from the beings with their minds. I know this sounds wacky, but these kids are 30 years old today. Their story is still the fucking same. And they all report that it was one of the most profound experiences of their life. So these beings get out of their craft, and they said I think they said they're all wearing these little black suits, that they were speaking to these kids through their mind, telepathically, and they were showing them images of our technology and the advancements that we were going to make, and basically told these kids, you have to be careful with your technology and you need to take better care of your planet and all this stuff. And then they just got in their craft and left. And honestly, there's an interview from back in the day with one of the teachers. It was the principal or something at that school. And it's one of the most convincing things, because you can tell this woman had been bothered by reporters kind of asking her dumb questions about this for way too long, and it was somebody just asked one too many times, and she was they were what happened here? She's well, aliens landed here in front of the school children, and I know that sounds crazy, but that's what happened. And that's kind of where she left it. She's yeah, aliens landed here. I don't really know what else to say. And it's to date one of the best daylight sightings ever recorded. And all those kids did hypnotic regressions and stuff, and they all had basically the same story. Really interesting case. But incidents like this, these contact events, there is often an emphasis on empathy and being careful and with technology and understanding that our ways of divide and conquer and nothing but war on our planet are, you know, not very civilized or advanced of us, and we need to do better. That's really it. And this has to do with nuclear technology a lot. In fact, as many of you know, most of the sightings of UFOs in the US, especially, came like post World War II as, the atomic weapons were being developed, tested, and eventually dropped in Japan. So we have had multiple, I would say, at minimum dozens, if not hundreds, of incidences of UFO, UAP showing up at nuclear facilities. Not just showing up, by the way. There was an incident where glowing red, like orb thing, was able to shut down all of our nuclear reactors, shut down all of our nuclear missiles, rather, at a nuclear storage facility. And the most important part of that was that the people who were working on that base who experienced that, many of them were interviewed as saying, I genuinely feel like there was a message, and the message was stop it with these weapons, pretty frankly, pretty loud and clear. There have also been incidents of an alleged UAP that cut the tip off of a test missile, and they were filming it, and the guy filming it said something came into the frame. We couldn't even see it because we were, it was like the 70s or something, and they were filming from the ground. But then someone was reviewing the footage later and called him into his office, and he said, "What the hell is this?" And he's like, and he showed the zoomed in thing, and it was literally something came in the frame, like lasered the tip of this warhead off, and it just fell off. And then it zipped out of the frame. I mean, like in less than a second, in reality, it did this. And he's like, well, sir, I don't know what to say. That looks like a UFO. These things allegedly have happened over our sensitive bases. So I guess empathy does matter, whether you think it's just a movie thing or you understand that it might be the real deal. And this one might be for the UFO enthusiasts, the Men in Black lore. So if you don't know, the Men in Black is not just a movie with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. It is part of UFO lore going back to the beginning of UFO lore, where often an experiencer, somebody who has a sighting, or if there's an alleged crash, something, many times there are government officials who just tend to pop up out of nowhere in the hours or days after that event. And they're often urging people to not talk about what happened, to say it was this instead, or they're kind of fed a story about what it was and what they should tell everyone. And most people report that these folks are kind of suits, they're often like wearing a suit or something. Not always, but often. And that's where the Men in Black kind of thing came from. But the weirdest thing, and it matters, so in the movie, she's like in the hospital, basically, whatever. She's somewhere, and she sees these men, government-looking guys, coming, like walking towards the entrance of the hospital, and she goes out the window, and she's like, "Oh, definitely not human." She says something about like them not being human, and it's funny because it's a very quick line, but to anybody who's paying attention, you're like, "Oh, that was kind of like a nod to the UFO crowd," because the lore is that these people show up in suits. They say what they have to say. They're very stern. They're, kind of government types. But a lot of people report that there's something characteristically strange about these men, that either their features are just a little off, like they just don't seem quite human, or their mannerisms are just weird. They're very stone-faced. They're very still. So a lot of people are like, either maybe they're like some sort of hybrid, or they're not a human at all, or the third theory that I've heard is that they're some kind of clones. Jury's out on that one. I don't know. But I thought it was just a funny line, and one that, if you were paying attention, was for you if you're a UFO enthusiast. Here's my one criticism of the movie, and I can't say exactly what it is because it would be too much of a spoiler. But obviously, this movie is called Disclosure Day, and as you might guess, disclosure does inevitably happen. Um, think giant dump of files type disclosure. Okay, so the world is already coming to the realization that we're in a whole different reality now, right? Where we've apparently known about this for many years, but not everybody has. Most people, you and I, general public, doesn't know anything about it. So everybody's just glued to the news, watching this giant dump. And then they decide to take disclosure a little bit further in that moment, which to me is just crazy. Like the giant dump of info would have been enough, I think, to make it realistic enough that it would be a huge life altering event. But they kind of take it like one cheesy step further that too much for day one, just so unrealistic. And I know that they were doing it with the intention of like making it this momentous kind of, like I was saying, the focus on empathy, the focus on oneness, the focus on things need to change, and maybe that was their way of making it adamant. They wanted to hear from this thing about this thing. I'm gonna give it away. Um, but yeah, that was my only critique. I thought it was like a little cheesy, a little too much, a little too over the top. I think Disclosure Day with the info dump probably would have been good as it is. But I found the timing of it fascinating, given that he's been planning this movie for 2 years, and how does it come out the same 2 months that all of the files are starting to get released now? I do find that rather interesting. There's definitely a lot more momentum now, a lot more than I expected, honestly, in this last month. David Grusch back in the news, kind of really pushing to push this whole timeline up and really put some pressure on the administration, on the Defense Department, everybody. And that he personally is going to be sharing some more things that he has firsthand knowledge of, which I think is a lot more than we think it is, unfortunately. And fortunately, because I'd rather hear from him probably than a lot of other people that we just don't know. So yeah, really interesting. We'll see what happens, but I think this is gaining a little more momentum at the moment than I even really expected at this juncture. So I'm excited. It's exciting. If you haven't seen the movie, I think it's worth a watch. Great acting, both funny and serious, and really kind of makes you stop and think, like, if we were to have control over disclosure, how would we do it? What would be the appropriate way? And I feel like those are the conversations happening behind closed doors right now as we speak, as it is. So the movie was interesting food for thought in that way, and I really enjoyed it. So go check out Disclosure Day if you haven't yet. And until next time, peace.